A grimy alley, the stench of stale garbage, and the desperate gasp of a woman. This is where 24-year-old waitress Ilara Hayes' life ended, and where a new, terrifying one began. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was just taking out the trash. But when she saw men dragging an older woman, Isabella Volkov, into an unmarked van, she didn't run. She fought. She saved the mother of Dante Volkov, the most feared man in Chicago. But the real story isn't the rescue. It's what Dante did next. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't a reward. It was an act so possessive and cold, it stunned his friends and terrified his enemies. The shift had been brutal. 12 hours on her feet at Il Corvo, a high-end Italian joint on Rush Street, where Ilara Hayes served $300 bottles of Barolo to people who wouldn't look her in the eye. Her apron was stained with marinara, her feet throbbed in her worn-out black flats, and the $84 in tips felt like a paper cut on the mountain of her student loan debt. All she wanted was her tiny, radiator-hissing apartment and a cup of instant noodles. "Ilara, take the back trash out before you clock out," her manager Brian barked, not looking up from his phone. "Got it." She sighed, hoisting the two heavy, leaking bags. She pushed open the heavy steel door into the February chill. The alley was a canyon of brick and dumpsters, smelling of damp cardboard and rotting food. It was poorly lit, with only a single flickering bulb casting greasy yellow light. She had just heaved the second bag into the dumpster when she heard it. A scuffle. A muffled "No." Ilara froze. This was Chicago. The rule was simple. You don't look, you don't listen, you walk away. But then came a sound that cut through her apathy. A sharp, distinctly female cry of pain. She peered around the edge of the dumpster. 50 feet away, under the halo of the weak light, two men in dark suits were forcing an elegant older woman toward a black minivan. The woman, who looked to be in her 60s, with a sweep of silver hair and a pearl necklace, was fighting. She swung her designer handbag, connecting with one man's head. "Get her in, idiota," the first man hissed, grabbing the woman by the hair. Something inside Ilara snapped. It was the exhaustion. It was the frustration. It was the sight of two men manhandling a woman who looked like someone's grandmother. Before she could think, her body moved. She scanned the ground, her eyes landing on a loose brick near a pile of construction debris. She snatched it up. "Hey!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Get the hell away from her!" The two men whipped around, their faces masks of pure shock. A waitress in a stained apron, holding a brick. It was almost comical. "Get lost, girl," the first man snarled, turning back to the woman. Ilara didn't get lost. She ran. She ran straight at them, screaming at the top of her lungs, and hurled the brick with all the force of her 120-pound frame. It missed the man, but shattered the side window of the minivan with a catastrophic crash. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the narrow alley. Both men flinched violently. The one holding the woman, Isabella, loosened his grip in surprise. Isabella didn't waste it. She stomped her heel down on his instep, hard. He roared in pain. "You crazy!" the second man started, pulling something metallic from his waistband. But Ilara was already moving, grabbing a half-empty bottle of vodka from the trash heap and swinging it wildly. "I've already called the cops. They're on their way," she lied, her voice shaking but loud. The sound of the breaking glass, the screaming, and the potential of police was too much for a clean kidnapping. The man with the gun looked at his partner. "Leave it. We're blown." They scrambled into the driver and passenger seats of the van, the engine roaring to life. The van screeched backward down the alley, disappearing onto the main street, its shattered window marking its escape. Ilara stood panting, the broken bottle neck still clutched in her hand. Her knuckles were white. The alley was suddenly silent, save for the thudding of her own heart and the ragged breathing of the woman she had just saved. The older woman, Isabella, leaned against the graffiti-covered wall, clutching her chest. Her beautiful silk blouse was torn. "Are you all right, Mum?" Ilara asked, dropping the bottle. Isabella looked at Ilara, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of terror and profound gratitude. "You saved me. You child, you saved me." "Let's get you inside," Ilara said, moving to help her. "We should call 911. "No!" Isabella's voice was suddenly sharp, filled with an authority that didn't match her vulnerable position. "No police, not ever. Please just help me. My son, I need to call my son." Before Ilara could process this, a black sedan, a gleaming Bentley, turned into the alley, its headlights slicing through the darkness and pinning them against the wall like frightened animals. The car stopped. 2 doors opened. A man in a perfectly tailored suit, Marco Rinaldi, stepped out of the passenger side, his eyes scanning the alley, his hand inside his jacket. But it was the driver who held the air. He was tall, impossibly so, and moved with a lethal, fluid grace. He wore no coat despite the cold, just a black button-down shirt that strained against his shoulders. His face was all harsh angles and shadow, dominated by eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the light. This was Dante Volkov. Ilara didn't know his name, but she knew his type. He was the kind of man who owned Il Corvo, not ate there. He was danger poured into a human shape. His eyes swept past Ilara, as if she were part of the garbage, landing immediately on Isabella. "Madre," he breathed, the word a gravelly rasp. He was at her side in 2 strides, checking her for injuries with a desperate, controlled panic. "Dante, I am all right. I am fine," Isabella said, grabbing his arm. "This girl, Ilara, saved my life." Only then did Dante Volkov turn his head. His gaze landed on Ilara. It was not a look of gratitude. It was cold, analytical, and utterly terrifying. He looked at her stained apron, her trembling hands, and the shattered glass on the pavement. He wasn't looking at a hero. He was looking at a complication, a loose end. "Marco," Dante said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Get my mother in the car. Call Dr. Abrami. Have him meet us at the house." "Yes, Capo." Marco gently guided Isabella toward the Bentley. Isabella looked back, her hand outstretched. "Dante, the girl—" "I'll handle the girl," he said, cutting her off. He took a step toward Ilara. She took an involuntary step back, hitting the dumpster. He was overwhelming, a predator in a bespoke suit. He stopped a few feet from her, his presence sucking all the air from the alley. "You saw their faces?" he asked. His voice was low, smooth, and laced with steel. "Yes," Ilara whispered, her throat dry. "You saw the van?" "Yes, a black minivan. The side window broke it." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He seemed to be calculating 1,000 different equations, and she was the variable he didn't like. "You're a waitress here," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Ilara Hayes," he said, reading the name tag on her apron. He tilted his head. "You were very brave, Ilara Hayes, and very, very foolish." He reached into his jacket. Ilara flinched, her heart stopping. She thought, "This is it. He's going to kill me." I saw too much. He didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a thick, black wallet. He extracted a wad of cash, hundreds, more than she made in a month, and held it out to her. "For your trouble. And for your silence. You saw nothing tonight. You went to work. You took out the trash. You went home. Understand?" Ilara looked at the money. She looked at his impassive, sculpted face. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. She had just risked her life. She had a brick-sized bruise forming on her shoulder from the recoil, and he was treating her like a problem to be paid off. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Dante's eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. It was the first flicker of genuine surprise. "I said," Ilara repeated, louder, "I don't want it. I'm glad your mother is safe. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to clock out." She tried to push past him. His hand shot out, grabbing her upper arm. His grip wasn't brutal, but it was an iron trap. It held her fast, and the contact sent a jolt of pure, undiluted panic through her. "You don't get to walk away," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You may not want my money, but you're now part of my problem. They saw your face. They know you're a witness. You saved my mother, yes, but you also made yourself a target. I can take care of myself," she stammered. A dark, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. "With a brick and a vodka bottle? Against Viktor Petrov's men? You're a child." He looked back at the Bentley, where Marco was waiting by the open rear door. His mother was watching through the tinted window. His decision was made. "What are you doing?" Ilara whispered as he began to pull her toward the car. "My mother called you an angel," Dante Volkov said, his grip tightening. "But you're a witness, and I don't leave witnesses to chance." "You can't do this," she cried, pulling back. "This is kidnapping." "No," he said, opening the car door and effortlessly pushing her inside, sliding in beside her. The door shut with the heavy, final thunk of a vault. "This is protection. My kind of protection." Marco got in the front, and the Bentley pulled smoothly out of the alley. Ilara looked out the window at the dumpster, the broken bottle, and the life she had just lost. Dante Volkov hadn't thanked her. He hadn't praised her. He had taken her. That was what he did next. And as Ilara sat trapped between a mafia boss and his consigliere, she realized this was the moment that shocked everyone. Not the attack, but the fact that the savior was now a prisoner. The ride was silent, but the silence was a living thing, heavy, oppressive, and smelling faintly of Italian leather and Dante's expensive sandalwood cologne. Ilara sat perfectly still, her hands fisted in her stained apron. She was acutely aware of the man beside her. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring out the window, his jaw tight, his reflection a cold mask in the glass as the city lights of Chicago streamed past. In the passenger seat, Marco Rinaldi spoke quietly into a phone, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "Yes, full lockdown. Double the perimeter at the lake house. I want eyes on every one of Petrov's businesses by midnight, and find that van. Burn it, and find the men who were in it. Capisci?" Ilara's blood ran cold. Petrov. Burn it. This was not a movie. This was real. They drove north, leaving the glittering artery of the Magnificent Mile for the dark, opulent privacy of the Gold Coast. The Bentley slipped into an underground garage beneath a skyscraper that pierced the clouds. The garage was cleaner than Ilara's apartment, brightly lit and populated only by a handful of other luxury vehicles, a Lamborghini, a classic Aston Martin, and 2 black Escalades that screamed security. "Stay," Dante commanded Ilara, as if she were a dog, before he got out and opened the front passenger door to help his mother. "Dante, the girl," Isabella said, her voice stronger now. She leaned on her son, but her gaze was fixed on Ilara. "We can't just take her." "I can, and I did," Dante replied, his voice firm but softened for his mother. "She's a civilian who just declared war on Viktor Petrov by smashing his van window. She'll be dead by morning if I let her go home. This is the only way." "It is not right," Isabella insisted, though she allowed him to lead her toward a private elevator. Marco held the car door open for Ilara. "Miss Hayes, please." Numbly, Ilara stepped out. Her legs felt like jelly. She was a waitress. She had a cat to feed. She had a shift on Saturday. This couldn't be happening. She followed them into the elevator, which opened directly into the apartment. The word apartment was an insult to the space. It was a penthouse, occupying the entire top floor. The elevator doors opened into a massive living area with 20-foot floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking 180-degree view of Lake Michigan and the sparkling city below. The furniture was minimal, modern, and screamed money. It was beautiful, sterile, and as welcoming as a block of ice. "Marco, take my mother to her suite. Have Dr. Abrami brought up the service elevator," Dante ordered. "I'll deal with her." Marco and Isabella disappeared down a white marble hallway. Ilara was left standing alone with Dante Volkov in the center of the cavernous room. The silence stretched, amplified by the sheer size of the space. Dante loosened his tie, his eyes finally settling on her, and this time she felt the full, crushing weight of his attention. He was assessing her, cataloguing her. The cheap shoes, the fraying thread on her apron, the tremor in her hands. "You live at 1412 North Ashland, apartment 3B, he said. Ilara's stomach plummeted. "How did you know that?" "My men ran the name on your apron 5 minutes after we left the alley. They are at your apartment now, collecting your things." "My things? You can't just go into my home," she cried, her voice echoing in the sterile room. "I have a cat. Milo, you have to let me—" "The cat will be taken care of," he said dismissively. "It will be brought here." This casual violation of her life, her home, broke through her fear. "You think you can just do this? You think you can just decide to take care of my life? I saved your mother. This is insane." "What you did was insane," he retorted, his voice dangerously low. He walked toward her, circling her slowly, like a shark. "You, a waitress, attacked 2 armed men. What did you think would happen? You think they just forget your face? You think you go home, feed your cat, and it's over? You're a loose end. Petrov's men will come for you, to silence you. And they won't be as gentle as I am." "Gentle? You call this gentle?" She shot back, gesturing around the opulent prison. "You're alive, aren't you?" he snapped. "You're not in a trunk. You're not at the bottom of the Chicago River. You're in the safest place in this city. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you? You abducted me. You have no right." He was in front of her now, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. He was a furnace of controlled rage. "Right? I am Dante Volkov. My right is protecting what is mine. And my mother is mine. By saving her, you inadvertently painted a target on your back, and in doing so, you became my responsibility. You became a complication, and I handle my complications." He turned away, walking to the vast window and staring out at the city he clearly owned. "So what now?" Ilara whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a cold dread. "Am I your prisoner?" "You are my guest," he said, the word a mockery, a permanent guest, until I decide otherwise, until I've dealt with Viktor Petrov, until I'm certain you are no longer a liability." "That could take months, years." "Then it takes months or years," he said, turning back to her. His face was unreadable. "You will have everything you need. Food, clothes, anything you want, you ask for. But you will not leave this building. You will not contact anyone from your old life. Your phone?" He held out his hand. "No," she said, clutching the pocket of her apron. Dante sighed, a sound of profound impatience. He didn't move, just kept his hand outstretched. "Elara, do not make this harder than it needs to be. Give me the phone." She hesitated. It was her last link, her one connection to the world she understood. "I can have one of my men take it from you," he said softly. "He will not be as polite as I'm being. The phone. Now." With a trembling hand, she pulled out her cracked iPhone 8 and placed it in his palm. His fingers closed around it. He didn't even look at it, just tossed it onto a marble side table as if it were trash. "This is my life," she choked out, tears of rage and helplessness finally welling in her eyes. "You've just stolen my entire life." "Your old life was a liability," he said, his voice void of sympathy. "It was small, and it was fragile. It's over. This is your life now." He pointed to a hallway on the opposite side from his mother's. "That will be your room. It has its own bathroom. Do not wander the penthouse. Do not touch my things. And do not ever try to leave." The shocking part wasn't just that he'd taken her. It was the totality of it. He hadn't just removed her from danger. He had erased her. He had plucked her from her world and dropped her into his. And he had done it with the casual indifference of a god moving a pawn on a chessboard. As Elara walked on shaking legs toward the hallway, she passed a large, gilded mirror. She saw her reflection. A girl in a cheap, stained apron, looking small and lost in a palace of glass and steel. She was a ghost already. Dante Volkov hadn't just protected his witness. He had buried her alive in the sky. The next 3 days passed in a disorienting, luxurious blur. Elara's room was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was a cloud of high-thread count sheets. The closet was the size of her old kitchen, and within hours of her arrival, it began to fill. Men, silent and dark-suited like Marco, brought shopping bags from stores Elara had only ever walked past. Neiman Marcus, Gucci, Prada. They brought silk pajamas, cashmere sweaters, designer jeans, and shoes with red soles. They brought toiletries that cost more than her weekly groceries. They also brought Milo, her ginger tabby cat, who immediately, traitorously, curled up on a $5,000 armchair. Elara touched nothing. She stayed in her waitress uniform for the first 24 hours, a small, futile protest, until one of Dante's guards, a mountain named Anton, politely but firmly removed the apron and her work clothes from her room, leaving her with no choice but to wear the opulent gifts. She was a doll in a dollhouse. She was fed 3 times a day by a private chef. She had access to a library of books she'd never have time to read, and a TV with 1,000 channels she had no interest in watching. But the windows didn't open. The elevator required a key fob she did not have, and there was always a guard stationed in the hallway. Dante was a phantom. She heard him sometimes, his low voice a murmur from his office down the hall. She caught glimpses of him, a flash of a black suit as he left or returned, always surrounded by men. He was running his empire, hunting the men who had attacked his mother, and he was ignoring her completely. She was cargo. Secured. Stored. Forgotten. On the 4th morning, Elara was sitting on the window seat, watching the tiny, ant-like people on the street 80 floors below, when the door to her room opened. It wasn't a guard, it was Dante. He was dressed in a grey tracksuit, his hair damp from a shower. He looked less like a mafia boss and more like an athlete, but the coiled danger was still there. He held a sleek, black tablet. "You're awake," he stated. "It's hard to sleep when you're a prisoner," she retorted, pulling her knees to her chest. He ignored the jibe. "You need a purpose. You're a student, yes? University of Chicago, art history. You dropped out 2 years ago." She stared at him, horrified. "You looked me up?" "I looked everything up," he corrected. Your 3.8 GPA, your parents' mortgage in Naperville, your father's $50,000 in medical debt from his heart attack 2 years ago. That's why you dropped out. That's why you work 60-hour weeks at Il Corvo for $84 in tips. Ilara felt stripped bare, eviscerated. He had dissected her life, her sacrifices, her private pain, and laid it all out. "Stop it," she whispered. "I'm offering you a solution," he said, holding up the tablet. "This is a bank account. I have opened it in your name with a non-traceable holding corporation based in the Cayman Islands." He set the tablet on the bed. Ilara looked at the screen. It was a bank statement. Her eyes widened until they hurt. The balance read, 2,000,000. "What is this?" she breathed. "It's the price of your silence, the price of your life. Your father's medical debt will be paid in full by noon today. Your parents' mortgage will be satisfied by tomorrow. This is for you, for your trouble." Ilara looked at the number. $2 million. It was a lifeline. It was an escape. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. It would solve every problem she had. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice hollow. "You stay here until I've eliminated the threat from Petrov," he said. "When it's over, my men will give you a new identity, a new passport. You can go anywhere in the world. Finish your degree in Florence. Buy a villa in Spain. You will be free, and you will be rich. All you have to do is stay quiet and forget you ever met me or my mother. Forget Il Corvo. Forget that alley." It was the perfect deal. A golden ticket out of her life of struggle. Ilara Hayes looked at the screen, at the number that represented freedom. She saw her father's face, grey with worry over the bills. She saw her mother, skipping meals to make ends meet. And then she looked at Dante Volkov, at his cold, handsome face, and she felt a surge of revulsion so powerful it made her dizzy. She picked up the tablet. Dante watched her, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought he had bought her, just like he bought the clothes in her closet and the building they were in. Ilara stood up. She walked over to him, and she pressed the tablet into his hard chest. "No," she said. Dante's expression didn't just flicker, it fractured. He stared at her, as if she'd just grown a second head. "What did you say?" "I said no. I won't take your money. I didn't save your mother for a payday. I did it because she was a person in trouble. You can't buy that. You can't buy me." "This is foolish pride, Ilara," he hissed, his anger finally showing. "This is $2 million. This is your family's future." "My family doesn't take blood money," she cried. "I will not be your dirty little secret that you paid off. You took my life. You took my home. You took my name. You don't get to buy my silence, too. You already took it." She was trembling from head to toe, but she held his gaze. And then the most shocking thing of all happened. Dante Volkov, the ghost of Chicago, the man who built an empire on fear, was rendered utterly speechless. No one had ever refused him. Not like this. Not his money. His money was a balm. It solved everything. It bought loyalty. It bought silence. It bought death. But it couldn't buy the waitress in the borrowed cashmere. He stared at her for a long, heavy minute, his mind clearly reeling. He was intrigued. He was furious. And he was, for the first time in his life, completely baffled by the woman in front of him. He took the tablet from her hand, his fingers brushing hers. The jolt was still there, but this time it was different. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. "You are a very, very strange woman, Ilara Hayes," he murmured. He turned and left her room, closing the door softly behind him. Ilara collapsed onto the bed, her heart hammering. She had just refused $2 million. Later that day, there was a soft knock on her door. It wasn't Dante. It was Isabella Volkov. She was dressed in a silk robe, her silver hair brushed and elegant. She looked frail, but her eyes were sharp. "May I come in, Kara?" Ilara nodded, sitting up. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, her gaze soft. "I heard what you did. What you refused." My men talk," Isabella said with a small smile. "Dante is beside himself. In all my life, I have never seen anyone affect him so. He does not understand you." "I'm not for sale," Ilara said simply. "I know," Isabella said, placing her warm, wrinkled hand over Ilara's. "My son is a good man, buried under a very dark life. His father, Dante's father, was murdered in front of him. He was only 15. He was forced to become what he is, to protect me, to protect his familia. He built these walls." She gestured around the penthouse. "Around his life, and around his heart. He sees everyone as a threat or a pawn." "He sees me as a liability," Ilara said bitterly. "He did," Isabella corrected. "But now he is shocked. You are the first person in a decade who wants nothing from him. The first person who has shown him genuine, selfless courage. He doesn't know what to do with you." Isabella squeezed her hand. "Be patient with him, Ilara. You frightened him more than Petrov's men did. You saved my life, but you may be the only one who can save his." Isabella left. Ilara was alone again. But something had changed. The shock of her refusal had sent a crack through the foundation of Dante's world. He had tried to pay her off, to categorize her and file her away. But she had refused, and in doing so, she had done the one thing that made her infinitely more valuable and infinitely more dangerous to him. She had made him see her. The dynamic in the penthouse shifted. It was subtle, but palpable. The air crackled with a new, unspoken tension. Ilara was no longer just a prisoner. She was an anomaly, a puzzle Dante Volkov couldn't solve. He stopped avoiding her. He began to observe. He would find her in the library, curled up with a book on Renaissance art. He would sit at the other end of the massive room, ostensibly working on his laptop, but she could feel his eyes on her. She'd look up, and their gazes would lock for a fraction of a second before he looked away. Milo, her traitorous cat, would often abandon her to curl up near Dante's office, as if sensing where the true power in the house lay. One evening, nearly a week into her captivity, Ilara couldn't sleep. The silence of the penthouse was too loud. She padded out to the kitchen, seeking a glass of water. The lights were off, save for the ambient glow of the city below. She found Dante in the main living area, standing in front of the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was in a black t-shirt and sweats, and he looked exhausted. The moonlight carved his face into sharp relief, highlighting the dark circles under his eyes. He seemed, for a moment, not like a monster, but just a man burdened by an impossible weight. He didn't turn as she approached, but he spoke. "You're up." "Couldn't sleep," she said, her voice small in the vast room. She stood a safe distance away. "You?" "I don't sleep much," he replied. He took a sip of his drink. Scotch. The smell wafted toward her. They stood in silence for a moment, two prisoners in the same tower. He of his life, she of him. "Why did you really do it?" he asked, his voice low, still watching the city. "In the alley." "Don't give me that. It was the right thing to do, bullshit. You're broke. You're struggling. You had everything to lose and nothing to gain. Why?" Ilara thought for a moment, tracing the skyline with her eyes. "When I was 16, my father, the one with the heart condition, he collapsed at my soccer game. He was clinically dead for almost 2 minutes. A man, A complete stranger ran from the stands and gave him CPR. He didn't stop, not for anything, until the paramedics got there. He broke 2 of my dad's ribs. But he saved his life. She turned to look at his profile. I asked him after, "Why did you help?" He just shrugged and said, "Because I knew how." It wasn't a choice for him. It was a reaction. She hugged her arms around herself. "I saw your mother, and I guess I knew how. To scream, to throw a brick. It wasn't a plan. It was just, I couldn't not." Dante was silent for a long time. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes finally meeting hers. The coldness was still there, but beneath it there was a flicker of something raw. A wound. "Selflessness," he finally murmured, as if tasting a foreign word. "It's a dangerous luxury. It's what separates us from people like Viktor Petrov," she said quietly. "And from people like me." His voice was a challenge. Elara didn't flinch. "I don't know what you are yet, Dante." A ghost of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched his lips. "Neither do I, mia cara. Neither do I." He downed the rest of his scotch. "Go to bed, Elara. You're safe here." It was the first time it sounded less like a threat and more like a promise. The next day, he shocked her again. He came to her room as she was finishing breakfast. He was immaculate in a dark navy suit. "Get dressed," he said. "Dressed for what? Another interrogation?" "We're going out," he said simply. Elara's heart leapt. "Out? You're letting me go?" "No," he said, shattering her hope. "We are going to the annual Children's Hospital Foundation ball. It's at the Drake Hotel. My mother is a patron. The Volkov family is expected to be there." "And you're taking me? Why? To show off your new pet?" His eyes hardened. "I'm taking you because Viktor Petrov will be there. My sources say he plans to make a public statement of condolences for the attack on my mother. A public, I had nothing to do with it, lie. And I am going to respond." "What does that have to with me?" "You," he said, stepping closer, "are my response. Petrov's men saw you. They reported back to him that a waitress saved Isabella. They think you're a loose end, a weakness. They are probably hunting for you right now, to silence you, to hurt me." He reached out, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, a touch that was both terrifying and electric. "Tonight I'm going to show him and everyone else in our world that you are not a weakness. You are not a loose end. You are mine. You are under the protection of Dante Volkov, and anyone who touches you will have to answer to me. It's the only way to keep you safe." This was what he did next. It was an act of shocking possession. He wasn't hiding her. He was going to parade her. He was painting a target on her back, only to stand in front of it himself. A guard brought in a gown. It was not a dress. It was a work of art. Deep emerald green silk, elegant and understated. But it cost more than her car. "Be ready at 7, he commanded, and left. Elara was terrified, but as she held the silk to her skin, another feeling crept in, a strange, dangerous thrill. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the protected property of the most dangerous man in Chicago. When she met him by the elevator at 7, she had done her hair and makeup. The dress fit as if it were made for her. She saw the flicker in Dante's eyes, the one that went beyond calculation. It was appreciation. It was possession. "You look," he started, then stopped. He cleared his throat. "Andiamo, let's go." He held out his arm. She looked at it. Then slowly, deliberately, she slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. His muscle tensed beneath her touch. "Just follow my lead," he murmured as the elevator doors opened. "And no matter what happens, do not leave my side." I'm not sure you'd let me, she whispered. He looked down at her, his dark eyes unreadable. No, he said. I wouldn't. They walked out into the garage, surrounded by guards, but it felt as if they were the only two people in the world. The crack in the ice was widening, and Ilara wasn't sure if she was falling in or if he was climbing out. The ballroom at the Drake Hotel was a sea of glittering diamonds and tailored tuxedos. It was a different universe from the alley. Here, the monsters wore couture and sipped champagne, writing checks for sick children while ordering hits from their burner phones. The air was thick with perfume, power, and hypocrisy. Ilara felt like an imposter. Her hand on Dante's arm was clammy, but his presence was a fortress. As they entered, a hush fell over the room. People didn't just look, they stared. They saw Dante, the ghost Volkov, a man who never attended social functions, a man who was practically a myth, walking in with a stunning, unknown woman on his arm. It was a declaration of war and a statement of power. He's here, Dante murmured, his voice a vibration against her ear. 2:00. Victor Petrov. Ilara glanced. Petrov was older, with a shock of white hair and a brutish, smiling face. He was surrounded by his own men, but his eyes, cold and blue, found Dante's immediately. He saw Dante, and then his gaze slid to Ilara. A flicker of recognition, and then pure, unadulterated hatred. He knew who she was. Smile, Dante whispered. You're with me. He can't touch you. He guided her to their table, where Isabella and Marco Rinaldi were already seated. Isabella looked radiant, her health restored. She beamed at Ilara. Ilara, tesoro, you look breathtaking. She kissed her on both cheeks, a public and deliberate show of affection. This was the second part of the statement. Ilara wasn't just protected by Dante, she was beloved by the matriarch. Marco stood, his smile as polished as his shoes. Miss Hayes, a pleasure to see you again, under better circumstances. Marco? Ilara nodded, a prickle of unease settling on her. There was something about Marco's perfect smile that felt wrong, but she dismissed it. He was Dante's most trusted man, his consigliere. The evening wore on. Dante was a magnetic, brooding presence at her side. He kept a possessive hand on the small of her back, introducing her to no one, but letting everyone see. It was the most terrifying and the most protected she had ever felt. I need some air, she finally whispered to him, overwhelmed by the staring and the suffocating tension. I'll come with you, he said instantly. No, please, she insisted, needing a moment of sanity. Just to the terrace. I'll be 5 minutes. Your guard can watch the door. She pointed to Anton, who was standing like a gargoyle by the ballroom entrance. Dante searched her face, his paranoia warring with her request. Finally, he nodded, a tight, sharp gesture. Anton will be right outside the door. Do not go anywhere else. She nodded and slipped away. The terrace was empty, overlooking the frozen lake. The cold air was a relief. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, just breathing. She was there for less than a minute when the terrace door opened again. She tensed, expecting Dante. But it wasn't. It was Marco Rinaldi. A bit overwhelming, isn't it? He said, his voice smooth as silk. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his handsome, practiced face. A little, Ilara said, moving slightly away. I was just heading back in. Dante is very taken with you, Marco said conversationally. It's all anyone is talking about. The girl who survived Petrov. The girl who tamed the ghost. I don't know what you're talking about, Ilara said, her hand on the door handle. Don't you? Marco took a drag from his cigarette. It's fascinating. He's so predictable in his unpredictability. He was always going to react badly to an attack on his mother. A cold dread, heavier than the Chicago winter, began to settle in Ilara's stomach. "What do you mean?" "The attack," Marco said, "was supposed to be a failure, a scare, just enough to rattle him, to make him look weak, paranoid, to make his captains question if he was losing his grip. Petrov's men were just supposed to grab her and be interrupted by my men, playing the hero, a simple plan." Ilara's blood turned to ice. She couldn't breathe. "Your men?" Marco looked at her, and the charming mask fell away. Beneath it was a chilling, reptilian ambition. "You," he hissed, "were not part of the plan. You and your goddamn brick. You ruined everything. You turned a simple scare into a failed kidnapping. You made Petrov look incompetent, and you made Dante look strong. He took you. He protected you. He brought you here. He was supposed to fall apart. Instead, he's consolidating." It hit her like a physical blow. The twist. The snake. It wasn't Petrov. It was Marco, the trusted consigliere, the man who had been at Dante's side for 10 years. "You set up the attack," Ilara whispered, horrified. "On Isabella? On your boss's mother?" "She's a tough old bird. She would have been fine," Marco sneered. "It was business. Dante is too cold, too controlled. He's not his father. He's bowed for the family. He doesn't expand. He just maintains. It's time for new leadership. You're going to kill him." "I was," Marco said, taking a step closer. "I was going to use Petrov as the blunt instrument. Let him and Dante bleed each other dry, and then I would step in and restore order. But you've complicated things, Ilara. You've gotten too close." He was inches from her now. "Dante trusts you. He's soft for you. And now you know, another goddamn loose end." Ilara's mind raced. Anton was outside the door, but Marco was between her and the door. "He'll kill you for this," she breathed. "Not if he's dead first," Marco replied, "and not if you're the one who did it." Before she could scream, he grabbed her. He was stronger than he looked. He slammed her back against the balustrade, his hand clamping over her mouth, suffocating her. "You're going to have a tragic accident, Miss Hayes, a broken heart. You're going to throw yourself right off this terrace. Dante, distraught, will be so easy to console." She fought, kicking, scratching at his hand, but he was ruthless. He was forcing her backward, up against the railing. She could feel the cold, empty air of the 12-story drop behind her. "Ilara!" Dante's roar was thunder. Marco froze, his head whipping around. Dante was standing in the doorway, Anton behind him. His face was not angry. It was a white, blank mask of pure, apocalyptic rage. In that split second of hesitation, Ilara acted. She bit down on the flesh of Marco's hand. Hard. Marco yelled in pain, his hand flying from her mouth. Ilara didn't scream. She grabbed the champagne flute he'd set on the railing and smashed it against the brick. "I told you not to leave my side!" Dante roared, already moving, but Marco was faster. Marco saw it was over. His plan was ashes. He grabbed Ilara by the hair, yanking her back as a human shield. "Stay back, Dante!" Marco screamed, a new wild panic in his eyes. "Stay back, or I'll throw her over." Dante stopped, his hands raised. "Let her go, Marco. Let her go, and I'll give you a clean death." "You think you're in charge?" Marco laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. He was dragging Ilara toward the other end of the terrace. "I've been playing you for a year, you arrogant bastard. He was cut short by a thwack. It wasn't Dante. It was Ilara. With her free hand, she had plunged the jagged stem of the champagne flute she'd broken into Marco's thigh. Marco screamed, a raw, agonizing sound, and his grip on her hair loosened. Ilara ripped herself free, stumbling and falling to the ground. She looked up, gasping. Dante Volkov was on Marco in an instant. It wasn't a fight. It was a dismantling, a brutal, methodical, and silent series of strikes. A right hook to the jaw that snapped Marco's head back, a crippling blow to the solar plexus. As Marco crumpled, Dante grabbed the front of his tuxedo, slammed him against the wall, and put his hand around his throat. Dante's chest was heaving. He looked at the man who had been his brother, his friend. The betrayal was a living thing in his eyes, hotter and more painful than the anger. "Why?" Dante choked out, his voice cracking for the first time. Marco just laughed, blood and spittle flying from his lips. "Because you're weak. You're just like her," he gurgled, looking past Dante, at Ilara. Dante's rage coalesced. It turned from white-hot to ice-cold. He didn't kill him. That was the shocking part. He didn't snap his neck. He didn't throw him from the terrace. He held him there for a second longer, and then, with a sound of utter disgust, he threw Marco to the ground at Anton's feet. "Get him out of here," Dante ordered, his voice flat and dead. "Take him to the warehouse. Call Petrov. Tell him I have a gift for him. A mutual problem to be solved." He adjusted his suit cuffs, his hands perfectly steady. He turned his back on his former consigliere as Anton and another guard hauled the groaning, bleeding man away. The terrace was silent again, save for Ilara's ragged gasps. Dante walked over to her. He crouched down, his eyes scanning her, checking for injuries. His gaze was intense, dark, and filled with an emotion she couldn't name. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice rough. He touched her hand. She looked down. A piece of the glass was embedded in her palm. "Dante," she whispered, her body shaking uncontrollably. "Shh," he said. He shrugged off his $10,000 suit jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was warm and smelled of him. He carefully, gently lifted her into his arms. He carried her out of the cold, back into the glittering ballroom. The music was still playing. The people were still laughing. They didn't see the blood on her hand or the murder in his eyes. He carried her straight through the crowd, past a stunned Viktor Petrov, past his shocked mother, and out the front door. He had exposed his enemy. He had been betrayed, and Ilara had, once again, been in the center of it. She hadn't just saved his mother. She had just saved him. As he placed her in the back of the Bentley, he looked at her, his face a mask of terrible, cold resolve. "This," he said, "is over. Tonight." The Bentley sped to a dark, industrial warehouse. Inside, Marco Rinaldi was tied to a chair, bloody and defeated. "You're going to end this," Dante told Ilara, positioning her with his guards, just as Viktor Petrov arrived. "Volkov," Petrov grunted, eyeing the traitor. "He's a gift," Dante stated, his voice like ice. He masterfully exposed Marco's entire plot, how he had manipulated both families, planning to let them destroy each other so he could take over. As proof, Dante offered Petrov a drive containing every recording Marco had made of his conspiracy. "I give you Marco," Dante offered. "In exchange, you get the drive, and we call a permanent truce." Petrov's eyes narrowed. "And the girl?" Dante moved, shielding Ilara with his body. He looked straight at his rival. "The girl is not part of the deal," he declared, his voice a low growl. "She is not a token. She is mine. She is Volkov, and she is off limits. That is non-negotiable." Petrov, seeing the lethal conviction in Dante's eyes, finally nodded. "We have an understanding." He had his men drag the screaming Marco away. The war was over. Dante had won. He turned to Ilara. "Now we go home." The drive back to the penthouse was silent. As dawn broke, Dante led Ilara to his own suite. He gently stitched the cut on her hand, his precise movements a stark contrast to the night's brutality. His killer's hands were surprisingly tender. When he finished, he dropped the ultimate shock. "It's done," he said. "The threat is gone. You're free to go." He told her the $2 million and a new identity were waiting. She could go to Florence, study art, and forget him. After claiming her so publicly, he was letting her go. But Elara shook her head. She looked at the man who was both her captor and savior. "I can't go back," she whispered. "You were right, that life is over." She stepped toward him, placing her hand on his chest. "You're a monster, Dante. But you're my monster." He stared at her, his composure broken. He warned her, "This is still a cage, Elara." "I know," she replied. With a groan of raw desperation and desire, he crushed his mouth to hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a choice. She had saved his mother, and now, by choosing to stay, she was saving him. That, my friends, is where Elara's story truly begins. She saved the mob boss's mother. But what he did next wasn't just to kidnap her or claim her. It was to give her a choice. And her choice, to stay, was the most shocking twist of all. She didn't just fall for the dark hero. She stepped into the darkness with him, with her eyes wide open. But a life with Dante Volkov is never simple. The truce with Petrov is fragile, and there are other families who saw Dante's weakness for a waitress. Can Elara survive being the one thing the invincible ghost of Chicago can't bear to lose? The shadows are long, and the knives are sharp. What did you think of Elara's choice? Was it brave, or was it foolish? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of dark romance and shocking twists, make sure to hit that like button. Share it with a friend who loves a good drama, and please